Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Pokies Burke, and this is the Career Slay podcast. Imagine the impact we could have on society if everyone loved what they did. That's what Career Slay is all about. I'm interviewing people who love their jobs and asking them how they got there and what they've learned along the way. We're here to slay the fear in career. In this episode, I'm talking to Michelle Milberger. She has over 10 years of experience in the people ops space, spanning established global organizations as well as early-stage startups. She's currently the VP of People Operations for Kizen Technologies, based out of Austin, Texas. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So tell me about your story. Let's start from the very beginning.
Very beginning. Well, I was born and raised in a small town in Texas, but I got out as soon as I could. So I was always outside, always reading, hanging out with friends. Very people-oriented person, very outgoing from a very young age. So I guess some things never change. I just really love to be the center of attention, very headstrong and curious. So those things have stayed with me throughout my career.
So where did you decide to go to college?
So I went to college at UT in Austin, where I studied psychology and English. I thought I was going to be a psychologist. That's what my mom does. And I started doing clinical research, actually, in my junior year of college and realized that I absolutely hated it, which is when I decided to study abroad, where I went to London and added an English undergraduate degree in addition to my psychology degree. And I decided I wanted to pivot and do business.
Okay, so let's take a step back. Tell us a little bit more about the clinical psychology rotation. So what did you actually do and why did it turn you off so badly?
You were really behind the door. Like you weren't directly interacting with the patient or with the person, getting to know more about them. It was a lot of data entry. It was a lot of building a hypothesis and trying to find that information, which like from a science perspective is great, but from a actually feeling like you're impacting the person and like connecting with someone on a real level, I felt like that was missing. And I joke with my mom, and actually her brother's also a psychologist, that also probably wasn't the right route for me, was to, because I feel like I always want to tell people what I think they should do when you need to like let them uncover that on their own.
Oh yeah. Is that not what therapists do?
I mean, I think they sometimes give advice, but I think it's really hard when you have like someone coming back like week after week being like, oh, I'm, struggling with this thing. And you're like, I think you need to do this or just stop it.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have the patience to be an effective counselor. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so you started out in psychology.
Yep.
Was it an internship?
No, so I did that research during school. Yeah, so that was probably 10 to 15 hours a week while I was going to school. Yeah.
Okay, got it. And then you studied abroad, picked up English, but then decided to do business. Help me understand the connection, the hopping from English to business.
Yeah, so I think once I realized that psychology wasn't the route I was going to go for me, I pivoted to how do I make myself more marketable? How do I make myself something that's going to be attractive to employers now that I knew I wasn't going to go the academic route? I knew I was going to be looking for something when I graduated. English was almost just easy because I was only a few credits away. I knew I wanted to study abroad, that international experience was going to be so important. And so I went to London, and it's like, what's easier to study?
They speak English there.
Yeah. Well, and also like I got to see like Shakespeare, like in the Globe Theater, like things like that were really cool. And I just love to read. I always have. And so that was an easy degree to add, is what I'll call it. I only needed a few credits to do that. But the business minor was something that I added on, knowing that I wanted to kind of get a business foundation certificate so I could show employers that I understood, business basics, that was important to me, and that I was trying to be in corporate, I guess, or trying to find a job. So I just thought that helped make me really more marketable than psychology and English. It's kind of hard to graduate and go into corporate with those degrees sometimes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Very similar experience on my end. I fell into business because my mom didn't know what industrial design was. So she was like, why don't you pick up another major just in case, as a backup?
Yeah,
like, cool.
The backup major. That's pretty much what it was. So it was more to say that I did it than it was for the actual degree itself. But I enjoyed it.
So then after you came back from studying abroad, finished your business minor, what'd you do after college?
So I started at Texas Instruments in Dallas. They had an HR rotation program where they moved you around to different parts of the business. So you got to learn more about the HR function and kind of build up your foundation. Some people who join HR out of school already have like a master's degree in HR. They've studied that. The school that I went to didn't have an HR degree specifically. And so I felt like that was really important for me to build those basics and get that grounding in the function.
So why did you choose HR specifically?
Honestly, I fell into it. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was about to graduate. I knew I liked working with people, and I knew I wanted to be a part of business. And psychology kind of set me up for being able to do HR. But it wasn't like HR was my passion. Like, people don't grow up like when they're little kids being like, I want to work in HR. Like, that's not how that happens, right? I kind of fell into it.
Yeah.
But it's been such a good fit for me because you really get to be in the room with leaders and be in the middle of business decisions, but you also get the people side. Like, you get to help people and help, resolve conflict and bring people together so they can be, their most productive selves. So I haven't looked back. It's been a great experience.
Awesome. So what was that rotation like? You talked about getting to do different HR functions. Can you break that down a little bit more?
Sure. So I started out in the recruiting function. First, I was doing internal recruiting, which that's you sitting behind a computer screen, like people apply, you look at their resume and you say, maybe we want to interview this person, and you kind of help them through the interview process. That's where I started. Pretty quickly after that, there was a role that opened up to do campus recruiting. And so I moved into doing that as a university recruiting manager, which means I was the kind of face of TI. I would go to all these different campuses. I would host a career booth at a career fair.
Hand out buttons.
Exactly. We would do on-site, we would do interviews there, and then kind of move people through that process. And so that was my first rotation. It was a little bit non-traditional because I did those two kind of mini assignments within it. I really enjoyed the campus recruiting because you get to travel and meet new people. And so I got to fly all over the U.S., which I really enjoyed. So that was the first 2 years of my career. And then I actually moved over to be what we call an HR business partner. So that's where you're stationed with a business and you're a generalist. So you kind of take all the different pieces and parts of an HR function and you're the one source of that face for that group of people. So for me at the time, I was working with our sales organization in the U.S. And so, if we had something come up related to compensation, I would go to our compensation partner and work with them. If we needed to recruit people or change kind of our headcount planning, like I would go work with those specialist partners to do that. And so I did that for about 2 years. And a year into that is when I decided to get my MBA.
What made you want to get your MBA?
Boredom, maybe. It's interesting. So I always like trying new things. And I feel like if I've been doing something for at least a year, I start to get a little antsy and start to be like, I need to find something different to challenge myself. And that's not always changing roles. But for me, like I was in each of those assignments for 2 years. And around the time of the second year, I was like, all right, I got this. Like, I know what I'm doing. It's a very cyclical role. You do things kind of similarly year over year. Of course, there are daily challenges that come up that are different, but you start to know what to expect and when to expect it, and like when you're going to be busy, when you're going to have time. And so for me, I was looking for something challenging to fill that space. And I also think it's really important to build a network of people. And Texas Instruments, great company, very big company, but also quite insular. And I like the idea of expanding my network. And I felt like going to get my MBA was a great way to do that. And I met a lot of amazing professionals like yourself. And
that's where we met. Just kidding.
And that has proved true. Like I met a lot of amazing people and definitely scratched the itch to keep learning and expand my knowledge base out of just the purely HR function. I think understanding how everything relates and how all of those things are connected, like it just helps you be a better employee in any of those functions.
So going into the MBA, I feel like there's a world of opportunities that open up. Were you thinking that you would stay in HR after the MBA was done? Did you want to just kind of accelerate or explore other options? Or did you go through the process thinking, I'm going to do something different at the end of this?
I went in eyes wide open, knowing that I didn't know. And I'm starting to see a theme throughout my career. I honestly didn't know what was going to be at the end of it, but I was open to the opportunity in whatever that might have been. I would say after the first few months, there's just so many exciting areas within business that I really thought that I wanted to go into consulting. I pivoted. I said, I'm going to do that. I started applying for consulting roles, joined the consulting club. And at the end of that, as I was applying for those jobs, I ended up getting some great offers and really considered making the career switch. But instead of making the jump, I brought that back to Texas Instruments and I said, hey, I do have these really cool opportunities in front of me. I would like to consider staying here in a different capacity. And I talked to them about going international. So I used that as a negotiation tactic to kind of take that next step in my career. And that's when I ended up moving to Germany, which for me, when I weighed the two options, I could have pivoted, I could have changed roles, but I thought that the experience of getting to go international was such an amazing opportunity that for me, staying and doing that outweighed the immediate change, right? I thought that was going to be enough development or enough growth, and it was something that I was really passionate about. And so I made the decision to keep going within HR and stay with the current company.
That's awesome. So what did you do in Germany? Like, how did this just come about?
Drink lots of beer. No. Germany was incredible. I highly recommend to anyone who's ever thinking about studying abroad or working abroad, like absolutely do it. It is a life-changing experience to see how other people live, how other people work. And I think going for, a week or two is one thing, right? Like we all take vacations and you're like, oh, that was fun. Like, I got to see this or I got to try this food. But getting to be in the daily grind, like the daily environment, like working there, walking to and commuting to work those are the things that like you have to settle. And you learn a lot about yourself when you're doing that. It was one of the best, most pivotal moments in my career was getting to kind of take myself out of my comfort zone and in the known and take that leap. It really cemented for me that it's okay to not look like the person next to you or think like the person next to you, that your experiences are valid and that your perspective is important.
Awesome. So were you still doing HR in that capacity or?
I was. It was a different function within HR. So I started doing talent development for our Europe region.
What is talent development?
Talent development, it can be a lot of things depending on the company that you're working for and how they define it. A lot of people will think of it just very basically as training, but in that role, you have to take a higher level strategic look and understand how all of those cycles fit together and how that interacts with the individual employee throughout wherever they are in their career, right? Someone could be early career and you talk a lot about goal setting and where do they want to go. Someone could be more mid-level career and have other priorities in life. And so you're focused more on the day-to-day and how they're interacting because they're not looking to grow super fast. They're, happy where they are. And that can go all the way to offboarding as well.
So how long were you in Germany doing talent development?
While I was in Germany, I did talent development for the first year that I was there. And then I got the opportunity to stay for a second year doing HR operations. That was my first operations role, which I really loved. I think that was the first time that I was super, super passionate about an HR job because it had such a strong systems component. So like, what are the enabling technologies that you're using in an organization for people to do their best work? So we were actually going through an Oracle HCM systems implementation at the time. And so I was the regional person for that and got to kind of see what happened on the ground and live through that, which was a really very consulting type of role. So it was kind of cool that I still got to see a little bit of that, except it was for an organization that I was internally part of. But yeah, so I was there for a total of 2 years and did 2 different jobs while I was there. The maternity leaves in Germany are a year plus. So for both of those, I was covering 2 different maternity leaves, which is a very different lifestyle and something I hope that we can eventually adopt here in the US.
Yeah, I agree. I want to know more about the operations side of HR. What else does it cover? Because I totally understand the talent development and the people side, but the operations and system side seems like something that maybe not a lot of people know about.
HR is only a very visible function when it's not working well or when you have a problem.
Yeah.
When it is going well, you're just like, wow, this is an amazing company. Like everything's awesome. It all seamlessly works together in the sense that like you have centralized ticketing. So you can work with different subsections of the company. So like take the development side of the business. You could have a question about my performance review and you need to submit that. Having a strong HR operations function means that someone could already have documentation created and like you can outsource that and have someone else answer that question. aside from the talent development manager or aside from the recruiting manager, if it's a standard, easy to answer question. We can also create knowledge bases so people can find information more easy, create a great employee experience where your data is easily findable and you can get what you need more quickly by having a really great internal website or portal. So yeah, it can span quite a few different functions. And I think it depends on the company that you're at. People ops is definitely having a heyday right now. There's so much money that's going into like an amazing people ops function, from onboarding, from offboarding, from development cycles, because the talent market is really tough right now. I mean, there's been a lot of layoffs, but there's a lot of people leaving. There's the great resignation after COVID. And so companies are definitely investing more money in HR operations and enabling technologies. So I think that's only going to continue to grow and continue to be a hot topic for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, that's fascinating, especially with, the proliferation of everybody changing and finding their priorities and leaving their jobs and finding something new.
Yeah.
So you were in Germany for 2 years. You did 2 roles. What did you start doing after you got back from Germany?
Yep. So I moved to be the talent acquisition operations manager. So that was a global process owner role that they created for me when I moved back. So I was responsible for the onboarding processes for all of our new hires globally. The reason that that was such an interesting role for me was because it married a lot of my different experiences. So I had the HR operations background, which it was resoundingly within the HR operations space, right? You're talking about large numbers of people, lots of process, and needing to work with enabling systems to create a really great experience. But it also involves a lot of recruiting. You have to have a deep understanding of the recruiting cycle, recruiting timelines, the experience of candidates, and how that looks going through that life cycle to joining a company. And then talent development. You think about new hire orientation, you think about ramp planning, understanding like job responsibilities and like how people will learn and what, how do you best enable someone to start at a company and be successful. So it was really cool to kind of see all of those different experiences come together for that role for me. I think I was uniquely suited to do that job. I'm really excited that they created that and that they're focusing on that. COVID was such an interesting time to do that kind of a job, right? Like you're shipping laptops to people's homes because they can't come and onboard in person. So there were a lot of interesting challenges at the time, and it was a really cool job.
Awesome. So how did you make your way to Kizen? Tell us about that.
I've mentioned before, I'm always looking for a challenge, always looking for new experiences. And for me, I took a step back and said, like, what's next? Like for me in my journey, what is the opportunity that I need to be pursuing for me to continue to grow? I had toyed with the idea earlier. I had mentioned wanting to be a consultant. And I think what was missing for me was seeing different size companies, different industries. Like I had been, at a very large enterprise organization for, 8 years of my career. And I needed to see something different. And so I kind of evaluated internal opportunities and said, I think I need to make the move. That's what's next for me. And so I started kind of putting out feelers and saying, what could be next. And I've always thought joining a startup would be really cool. And I'm glad that I did. It's a really interesting change and more different than I ever could have imagined.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do for Kizen?
So at Kizen, I am the head of our people operations organization. So again, it's a unique opportunity because I've done almost every function within HR that to be kind of that generalist or that face of HR for a small organization. I mean, you can't go out and hire one person to do everything, right? And so it's fun because I get to wear so many different hats every day, where I could be dealing with like an employee complaint, and then I turn around and do an interview because I'm a recruiter, and then I go sit in a strategy meeting and I, understand what we're doing as an organization and help priority planning. So it's fun because I get to pull from all those past experiences that I had. TI helped me really build a great HR foundation that I can grow off of.
That's awesome. Okay, so you're the VP of People Ops at Kizen. Can you explain what you do super simply, like you were explaining it to my grandmother?
Yeah. So if I boil down to just its most basic components, I would say that I'm responsible for all things related to people within a company. If I take that one step further, I would say that I have to keep the company's long-term goals and objectives in mind while managing the full employee life cycle. So that can be from recruiting and onboarding to development, training, benefits, compensation, and how all of those components work together. All of this is done in service of helping the company achieve its long-term strategic objectives by creating an amazing culture and employee experience, because I I really believe that people are a competitive advantage and their best work is performed when employees are motivated and able to bring their authentic selves to work.
That's just an amazing way to put it. I never really thought of HR in that capacity. And so the way that you articulated your role is just such a refreshing take on what people operations and human resources really means.
Thank you. I mean, when HR's done really well, I feel like employees don't even know it's there, right? It's whenever it's either not done well or when you have a problem that I think HR gets surfaced. And so we tend to get a bad rap. That's why we have to rebrand to people ops. Every few years, you have to rebrand.
So a question that I ask every guest on the podcast is, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Learn what motivates you. And that's different for everyone. And there's no silver bullet for like understanding your motivations or drivers. That's a lot of self-reflection. That's taking the time to say, like, what do I love? What about this do I enjoy? Your motivations and priorities can also change drastically over the course of your life. And that's totally okay. Where you're at when you're 20 versus 30 versus 40 isn't necessarily going to be the same. It might be, and that's awesome. But people change over the course of their life, and being willing to change and adapt and continually grow, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I'll say, just listening to your story, I feel like growth has been the underlying theme in your career. And it's super cool to see how you fell into this function of HR and it's grown into such a prolific path and journey for you because you were constantly questioning your motivations and figuring out what's best for you, what is the next thing that you want to do, how do you want to grow, and that's given you this really just amazing and successful career.
There's no such thing as success or failure except how you define it. And if you have a growth mindset, if you're thinking about my main goal from this is to learn something, it's easier to not beat yourself up about like, oh man, I totally whiffed that presentation, right? Like, what did you learn from that? What do you take away from that? That's not a failure, that's growth.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, sometimes we can set these standards for ourselves and these goals for ourselves.
True. Yeah.
That win or lose, I think it's about the journey and what you learn from that experience. That's probably the most valuable lesson.
Absolutely.
So, totally agree with you on that.
I mean, and that even makes me think, you've talked a lot about your experience like as a working mom and like trying to navigate that and figure out like what works for you. And it's such an easy time to beat yourself up and say like, that's not going well, or I'm not doing the best. But like, those are all standards that you're setting for yourself, right?
It's so easy to get caught up in comparing your success or identifying your worth as how much money you make or the title that you have or the path that you're on and how society defines that success. But when I'm really like reflecting on what does success mean to me, it's exactly that. It's what does it mean to me? It's not what does it mean to you? And when you free yourself of what other people think, it eliminates all of the fear of failure.
So true. Yeah. It's really easy to compare yourself to other people. And I love what you said about like success is whatever it is for you. Like, I think that's such a personalized thing. Like, how do you know you've made it? Like, there's no making it, right? Like, are you happy? Like, what is your metric? Like, how do you define that is so important. But then also like, what stage of their journey are they on? It's really easy to look at someone else and be like, it seems like they've got everything. They've got it all figured out. Mm-hmm. They could be 10 years further down that path or have found it, 5 years earlier than you did. I think it's important not to look at other people and compare. It's about yourself.
100%. And it's challenging to see some of these lists with people who accomplish all of these things at such a young age, because some of your best work is done in your 50s and 60s once you have all of that wisdom and experience to back it up.
I find the idea of passion or like life's work to be a really interesting concept where there's so many people who live to work. Like, it's a very American mindset that like your career defines you. Your career is who you are. It can be a bit overrated, and that may sound jaded, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but what I mean is that your job is your job, and that can be your life's work. That can be what defines you, but can it also be just a very small portion of who you are as a person, right? Like, you can also be a mother, like you can also be a friend, you can be a daughter. I mean, there's other roles in our lives that are really important, and I think we've started looking at just this portion as like, what is success? And it's a very American mindset. And some people work to live. They work so they can get a paycheck, so they can do the other things that they love that fulfill them. And that's totally okay. Like that can be success too.
Wow, this is such a great topic, Michelle, because I often tell people that, your job title is not your identity. And
I've struggled with that for so long.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do because, and from my own personal perspective, I have always felt that I check the box and get to the next title and check the box and get to the next title because I was just so achievement oriented that what am I if I'm not this thing, So that's one thing. And the second thing is that your paycheck does not define your worth.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So I completely agree that we are in a society where people live to work and have completely forgotten what it's like to live without work. I mean, even the fact that people don't even take their vacation days is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been on a vacation where I didn't take my computer.
Oh, that's insane.
Right? I mean, like, when are you ever really disconnected and like enjoying what you're working for?
Yeah.
People right now are, I think, catching on to the idea that like work isn't the only thing that defines you. And employees are asking so much more from companies now, which makes people operations such an interesting space to be in because companies, it's not just paying people more, right? We have to offer flexible work. We have to offer shorter work weeks so people can enjoy their free time. Like we're in such an interesting space right now where everything's in flux and people are requesting and expecting more from the companies that they're part of. And they want to have more of a voice in defining what the employer-employee relationship looks like. And so you see people moving towards contract work or like the gig economy. Like I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And we need to keep up. We need to create an environment where people can do what they want when they want. But also, like, how do you tie that all together? It's such an interesting space to be in because if you've got all these people coming in and saying like, I want to do what I want when I want, it's like really hard to create a cohesive team out of that. So I think it's a really cool space to be in, and I'm excited for the challenge and what's coming next.
How do we solve that problem? Do you think that's going to come from smaller companies charting the way or larger organizations changing their systems?
I think it's going to come from smaller organizations first. Larger companies, it's so hard to turn the ship, right? You've got kind of older technology, you've got bigger teams. Like it just takes so much longer for change to take effect in a large organization. Although they have the capital and the resources to kind of pave the way and say like, this is what the new future of work looks like. So I do think that they have a space in kind of defining that. But I think the smaller and medium-sized companies, you're going to see them iterating much more quickly on, 4-day work week or what does the future of work look like? And they're going to be paving the way for us to say like, that's what best in class looks like. That's what the future looks like.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So for our last question, if you had to sum up your career in 3 words, what would it be?
I have no idea. That's so hard to do. Curiosity, growth. Can I just do 2?
Yeah, you can just do 2.
I feel like
people.
No, I'm it's so hard to summarize something in just 3 words, but people, adapting.
We'll pick one.
We'll
narrow down to 3.
I'll let you know later.
Don't worry. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. This has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. And I know that people are going to have so much to take away from your story and your journey.
Thank you for having me. This has been awesome.
The Career Slay podcast is a co-production of Career Slay and Wild Reply, produced by Michael Berg. Stay tuned for some great conversations on slaying the fear in career.